Buckley Smith, and you're listening to SLEERICKETS, a podcast about poetry and other intractable problems. This week, I am having a conversation with Cameron that there's every reason not to have. I have been thinking about this one for a little while and trying to figure out how to manage it. And we did our best. I expect some emails after this one, but all I would ask is just don't, disagreement's totally fine, disapproval's totally fine, but don't get hung up on if we just barely catch the right edge of one word or the other. If we don't get too hung up, if you can help it, on whether we perfectly phrased everything. I think all this, I don't know, I thought it was an interesting episode. Again, one of my rules is if I have a feeling like this is probably a bad idea, then I feel like it's at least worth exploring. And I found it pretty interesting once we got into it, and I hope you do as well. Just we're doing our best. We did our best. All right, here's my conversation with Cameron about poet and aspiring public figure Stephen Scaer.
I was once on a forum and I was talking to someone about doing those kinds of exercises, and someone berated me and was like, you have to treat every single thing you write as sort of, the best poem you could possibly write, and therefore, exercise doesn't come into it. And I don't know why. I guess maybe
in what discipline is that a good practice? I don't know.
Yeah, maybe it was their idea. Was
surgery, I guess. Surgery is it's no, everyone counts.
Yeah, it'd be quite bad if you were practicing on certain people.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I guess maybe the idea is that for him, form and content blended together in such a way that you can't write good form unless you're sort of trying to make it about a thing in the best way you can, and therefore it has to be a poem. But I don't agree with it. I find it strange. And in many ways, I feel like that idea, not stated in that way, but that idea that you can't write an exercise has really sort of entered into how people talk about poetry nowadays, especially in school when people are told there are no rules, the writing of poetry has fallen so far from music practice, where there is such a big difference between, doing scales exercises and doing actual, compositional work on whatever instrument. So it's quite sad.
Yeah, I think it's probably there's some relationship there to the point that Alice picked up on and she talked about it in the Advice from an Unknown Poet with Jonathan that Shane made when he said that in workshops there's too much emphasis on what is sort of the truth of the feeling of the poem to the poet. And I think that whether that's a question in workshop or whether it's just a question in one's own mind in writing, I think it, by my lights, it's very useful to be able to take your own completed work as lightly as possible.
Yeah, or at least separate yourself from it. That's what I learned from the sort of online stuff forums when I was a teenager. Separate yourself from work.
Speaking of which, we have to give a special thank you to Alex Pepple,
yes.
runs Able Muse and Erratosphere, and who came through for us with a last minute PDF for you, which was very helpful.
Yeah, it was very kind of him. Especially because I don't think I critiqued any of his poems. We're briefly on a Erratosphere at the same time. Yeah, I was surprised. I'm surprised that he because you were he remembers you, and I was like, really? I don't think I don't think I've ever critiqued the other stuff. So I was flattered. And
but he's aware of who's on the forum, and I think you tend to be a memorable presence in any given conversation if you're participating actively.
That's true. I haven't participated actively on that forum for a year now, so maybe I've entered into the annals of history.
Though I think the recency in Erratospherean terms is not so far off from recency in poetry, right? If it happened within the last decade, and still, if it happened within the last quarter century, it's still pretty new.
Well, I think Erratosphere is older than me by 5
Yeah, I think
5.
so. Yeah, I think it probably is. Yeah.
That's sweet. That's sweet.
Because I
That's
mean,
nice.
it at least comes close to coinciding with the mainline new formalist stuff. Like it, because Alex is definitely like an early internet guy. I mean,
Yeah.
and the whole Able Muse and Erratosphere website feels very much like early internet, just in the way it's the formatting, the presentation
Yeah.
of it. He's like a seat of pants, do it yourself computer engineer. So yeah, I mean, I think it goes quite a ways back, and probably was historically a pretty important forum, and it is still going today. There are people who make use of it still.
Yes. It is
Though I
still
think,
good.
yeah, I think as a social medium, probably a certain corner of Substack has started to pick up some of that slack. Um,
I think a Register also is not dated, but like just as a media, not as a social medium for people. I think it's like a social medium for a particular group inside the new formalists, almost
yeah, yeah,
not aesthetically, but just a certain group of people who all came of age around the same time. Well, it came of age in the poetic sense, not in the in the sort of aging sense. But like so, I think it always struck me when I first went on there, like how many people talk to each other in a very casual, friendly way. Because I'd been on, a poetry forum before that, and that would have been like hyper obsessively focused on, workshopping and stuff in a way, and it was like very formalized. While Raidersford did feel much more like a sort of clique or a club.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and I feel, yeah. I looked on it recently. Traffic, I think, continues to go down, and like has
yeah,
been for
yeah,
good
yeah.
years, but it's still functional to an extent, I think.
Yeah, I think no, I mean that's the impression I get, and I think Alex has always got a lot of balls in the air, and I had an exchange with him. I think he's got a lot of stuff going on now, but I'm hoping at some point to get him on the show just to sort of talk through some of the, if nothing else, the whole weird world of Able Muse and Erratosphere. But
Yeah.
we are talking today in part about a, I don't know how much of an Erratospherean he was. I haven't gone into the archives, but my guess is that he probably shows up there. He definitely shows up in various affiliated venues over the
Yeah.
years. I've been trying to think all morning about how to frame this because like but through no fault of your own, you have momentarily become the least divisive person on the podcast. Because Alice and Brian and I all got into varying degrees of trouble recently. So, yeah, I thought I would catch you up by, by getting you into some separate, unrelated trouble with this
Good.
episode.
Good. I'm jealous. I'm jealous of
Yeah,
you guys.
yeah, well, we can cause some trouble here. So, in what order should the caveats begin? Maybe first should just be this is not this is neither an endorsement nor a takedown exactly. It's an attempt to talk about something that there's every reason in the world not to talk about. And I suspect that although there should be plenty to piss off both the liberals and the conservatives who listen, or the progressives and the religious or whatever, I suspect that the progressives will be madder than
Yeah.
the conservatives because we're going to at least in part humanize and speak some good of this person. So maybe the most important caveat though is this is somebody who actually does have a somewhat limited online presence. There are not very many people online who have a smaller presence than I do, at least by the measures I was able to come up with. But he does not have a huge online presence. So I really don't want anybody who listens to the show to go harass him. I have heard recently, I'm not going to be too specific about it because I don't want to draw a lot of attention to it, but I have gotten some indication that in response to some things on the show, other people have gotten some online harassment recently, and I
Really? Oh
really don't
God.
want, like, that's really
No.
not acceptable. Like, if you listen to the show, good lord, do not go fucking harass people over this stuff.
Like
Um,
I like to troll people
yeah, yeah, yeah,
verbally on the show, but maybe hypocritically, I do find the idea of just doing that online on social media quite distasteful. I think because
yeah,
it has this,
yeah,
there's even more anonymity there, and it's just, and there's a difference I think between critiquing maybe a little cruelly someone and their
Yeah,
ideology
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
hacking them online is just that's just I don't know, that doesn't sit well for me.
Yeah, this was like ugly in a way that I think
Yeah.
yeah, nobody would really dispute. But yeah, but I really don't want people to go harass this person.
Yeah, seconded, yeah.
Um, however, I'll also say that I don't have as many misgivings attending to this person because he has and continues to really actively pursue attention. But he seeks out attention and controversy in in no uncertain terms, and is run for office on that you know with that mo. So it's not like we're picking on a totally private citizen. So we're talking about Stephen Scaer.
Is that how you say his name? Steven Scaer?
That's how I have heard it pronounced, but I don't
Okay.
know.
The machine calls him Steven Scour, which
Scour.
I quite like.
Yeah, I don't know. Although it was funny looking it up, there appears to be Scare seems to be like a more common name than I had thought, and they all seem to be very conservative Christians. But
Really?
like the
Wow.
name keeps coming up in the context of people with like very hardline conservative Christian points of
You
view.
know, that's scary.
Yeah, I don't know. Uh, so this is a guy who let me go through some of my notes. Maybe the first notable blip on the timeline is he won the 2008 Howard Nemeroff Sonnet Award for a poem called Sightseers. I didn't see that he had won that until after I made that selection for you. So
Yeah, yeah.
initially I transcribed a 14 poems, or 14 pages of poems from his one book for you. That was not among the poems I selected. I mean, I think that's a perfectly competent poem, but that was not among the ones I selected. I was then able through because of Alex. Alex, gave us a PDF for you to read the whole thing. But that that's the first his first appearance on the timeline as I've been able to see it. He published some poems in various places, a lot in like light verse, the Formalist, a lot in National Review, and then he was a finalist for the Able Muse Book Award in 2012, the year after I won it, and then he published his book with Able Muse in 2013. Um, this is God bless Alex Papel. Again, just incredibly hardworking and so generous, and has done so much for me and for both of us, especially by way of Erratosphere.
Mm.
Book covers have never, I think, been Able Muse's strong
Oh,
point. I think they have gotten better on balance, but that's never been what they were best at. I think the cover to this book is quite bad, not the worst I've seen, but quite bad. The title is the worst, though. I don't know that I've ever heard a book of poetry with a worse title than this one. It's called Pumpkin Chucking.
yeah, it's not good.
Just oof, man,
But
rough,
there's
really rough, really
a
bad.
torturous half rhyme.
Yeah,
Um,
right. No, exactly. It's like there's no good way to slice that one. So here's how I encountered this book. So like 10, 15 years ago, I was asked to do a book review by this magazine. I did not end up publishing it with them, but they said, "Hey, you want to do a book review for us?" I said, "Sure." What do you want me to review? And they said, "Well, we've got some books. We could just send you the books we've got, and you could pick one." And I said, "Sure, great. Go ahead and send me the ones you got." And they sent me a giant fucking box of 99 books of poetry.
oh my god.
Um, and I wasn't sure exactly what to do. And then I had a sort of like a harebrained notion because I initially miscounted and I thought it was 98. And so
Yeah.
I wrote to Alex at Able Muse and I said, do you have any books that I could, because none of them there were no Able Muse books in the box. And I said, do you have any books of poetry I could take a look at? And he sent me two or three that I read. I don't remember the other one or two, but I do remember Pumpkin Chucking, which again I thought bad cover, worst title, but I thought it was actually like memorable and had some standout stuff in it. And I didn't end up reviewing it because I recounted and there were 99 books in the box, and I thought, that there were 99 and that I'm not even selecting any of like it's completely outside my choice, even if it's not necessarily a random sampling, gave it sort of an interesting flavor. And so I ended up doing a big weird essay reviewing all of them.
Oh
Um,
yeah, I'm reading that. Yeah.
So it was a fun, it was, a fun sort of exercise. And I had various, I wrote a much, much longer version of that essay and then ended up publishing it with Jason Guriel and Carmine Cernino and their short-lived magazine Partisan. And they did a wonderful job editing it. But like part of me was like, this pumpkin chucking book, somebody ought to review this. I ought to review this. This is worth at least like taking some note of. And I didn't, and I felt a little bad about that, particularly because Alex had sent me the book, and I never did anything with it. And I went back a couple of years ago and thought like, hey, my thought when I read that was, this has actually got something to it. I bet his second book will be quite good. And so I looked to see what he published, and he never published a second book. And he did, the latest poem I was able to find of his that he published after Pumpkin Chucking was in 2017. It was a national review. I have not been able to find any poems that he's published or any records of poems that he's published since then. There was a poem or two he published in First Things that I was not able to read, but I don't think anything was later than 2017 or thereabouts. And then I saw that he had sort of not necessarily reinvented himself, because what was clear reading the book was that he sort of was a conservative leaning guy. There are definitely poems in the book that feel kind of conservative. He's got the like classic, bow tie in his author photo. He's publishing a National Review, first things where I've published. But, I got the general impression he was sort of like a mainline conservative-ish, Christian-ish, or Christian poet, but that mostly he was like a poetry guy. And then he also had this sort of leaning, but it didn't seem like it was overwhelming or it entirely defined him. That is no longer the case. So since then, he has become a very active. I think different people would put it in different terms. I think he would say, I don't know that he would even use the term gender critical. He would probably say he is an activist concerned with like the medicalization of children. But, I think other people might call him just simply an anti-trans activist. He and his wife have both gotten involved in some free speech cases where they've mostly won out. In New Hampshire, he ran for the New Hampshire State Senate twice in 2022 and 2024, lost both times. He got involved with a Maine House of Representatives legislative document, which is like a bill, and he sort of redefined himself as Sidewalk Steve, which is how he's also defined on the transgender map, which is a sort of a trans rights activist page identifying various characters. I know there's some problems with some of the fact checking on that page, but he has become Sidewalk Steve, and his MO is he wears a sandwich board or carries a sign, and he specifically goes to trans or pride rallies or events and carries provocative signs that the explicit goal, as he has said in an interview or two, the explicit goal is to provoke an over-the-top reaction from a trans activist, which he films and which he then posts online. And he gets footage of people screaming and saying irrational things or saying angry things and being, badly behaved. And he's the one setting it up. And so he's generally quite mild-mannered in the video, but the goal, as he's acknowledged, is not to convince anybody there. The goal is to create sensational content to then post online to get more attention. So conservatives and liberals listen to the show. I don't really want to debate politics. I'm a dumb lib lefty. I vote for Democrats. If I were in New Hampshire, I would definitely have voted against him. In addition to the trans stuff, he adopts the full slate of other down the line conservative Republican opinions. I do think that he got into this in good faith. I don't think he's simply a malevolent figure. I think there was a genuinely terrible family event. He's talked about. I'm not going to get into it here. And I think that there was probably some genuinely bad, I think he got a raw deal from his employer, and like some shit happened that was sort of in the excesses of the Great Awakening. I think like he caught some serious strays in a way that I think he does have some real grievances there. But as a result of that, this is now become his life. He is now like this is now the way he entirely defines himself, as being somebody who doesn't just concern himself specifically with the medicalization of children, but like drives across state lines to protest a student organized drag show at a high school in Massachusetts. Right. And he like refuses to use people's preferred pronouns, and he supports laws that prevent, even like passing trans people from using the bathroom that you would think they would use by looking at. I mean, it is not. I think they're probably. I think he comes into this with some good faith, but I think he's become a sensational, online activist guy, and like that's become his whole life now. And he does not really seem to be doing any poetry anymore. So that's sort of the political end of it.
Does he talk about his poetry in the interviews you've read? Does he?
I kept looking for some, reference to this, some moment, something. And I thought I had found one from like 2020, but then it turned out it was like in a series in which he had appeared, somebody else had talked about poetry. But he really doesn't seem to refer to the poetry at all. The only overlap, again, like there are one or two poems that seem to sort of gesture in the direction of the trans stuff, although mostly it's sort of more family stuff, Christian stuff, some like men being men stuff. Although again, like part of what I initially liked about him is that he's sort of like a gentle caregiver guy. Like he writes a lot about like taking care of his daughters, and he's sort of like a gentle performative masculine or macho guy. He seems like he doesn't seem like in that sense, he doesn't seem like a men should be men figure from today's, hardline online right. But I think the one real point of overlap I could find was simply on his book's Amazon page. Let me pull it up. It doesn't have a lot of reviews, but most books of poetry don't have a lot of reviews. So mostly they're sort of like high-ish reviews, 4s or 5s, saying like, hey, this is funny and formally competent. And then it looks like there are a few sort of targeted 1-star reviews. Most of them just say it's bad in various words, but one of them I think sort of gives the game away, because again, I just don't think 1-star reviews are that common for books of poetry. But here's I think the one that kind of that explains what's really happening with these. I won't read the guy's name, he's listed here, but the review is it's 1 star. As a fellow writer, I respect Mr. Scaer for pursuing his passion and publishing his work. As a person with an ounce of humanity, however, I cannot in good faith recommend this work, knowing that Mr. Scaer dishonored a member of his own family in the wake of their death, misgendering and disrespecting them flagrantly and without regard or consideration. His words are made ugly by his malicious actions. In a world of limitless options for entertainment and enrichment, please consider supporting an author who respects others' humanity and treats all people, whether alive or dead, with respect and dignity. I will just say, like, listening to him talk about the family member, it was because of the differing accounts, I can't remember how it was a niece or a nephew, but how this person identified. But the way he's talked about this person who died, I think you can argue about the dead naming or the misgendering, but he's talking about somebody he knew very well and loved, and he speaks about this person with love and respect. So I do think that he got a lot of grief online when he posted something on Facebook mourning the death of this girl. I mean, it was boy, or like, it was a terrible thing, and I think people responded in a really awful way at that moment, and that it seems to have sort of galvanized him in a direction that's just led to, I think some ugly and unproductive, call it dialogue. I don't know. Activity. Yeah.
That is basically the universal case with all these people. I mean, even someone like Rowling, however, whatever you think of her, originating comments was pushed further right wing and into like extreme insanity by the extreme insanity of people who like responded to her original comments, and
there was some truly terrible, vicious stuff that she got in response to that. And here's the thing that I find like funny and strange, not funny, but like kind of weird about all this is, I think like there is a version of the fear that a lot of anti-trans activists have, which is I'm afraid that the the trans person in question will get caught up in this idea or get caught up in this movement or this trend, and you will decide that this defines you and you will commit yourself to this, and then this will become the story of your life, and you will find that you sort of can't get out of it, that
Yeah.
you've gone too far down this road and you can't go back, and it's become everything that you're all about, and that will be your life instead of something else being your life that might have been more rewarding or might have been more rich or well-rounded. I think that is sometimes very sincere fear, sometimes, more, not always in good faith. But I think like that is a fear a lot of anti-trans activists express about trans people and especially about kids.
Yeah.
And I think strangely, or maybe appropriately, I think that is also what often happens to anti-trans activists.
Yeah, that's very true. That's
Like
very
this
true.
has become his life. This has
Yeah.
become J.K. Rowling's life. Like whether or not her initial comments were on one side or the other side of some line, she's now gone whole. Like this is what her life is about now. And this, it's the same with Stephen Scaer. I mean, in Rowling's case, she is at least still writing. He doesn't seem to be writing poems, and his writing was never never close to having the kind of influence or presence that hers did. But when I read this book and when I reread this book recently, I thought like, hey, there's some stuff here. And on the one hand, like by my lights, my thought is like, don't be an activist. I mean, like honestly, I kind of feel like I would feel this way even if he had done exactly the same thing but become a really hardline pro-trans activist and stopped reading poetry.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
There's part of me that would still like I'm an amoral aesthete, like like I'm a black-hearted rogue. I'm like a Francois Villon. I'm not a Francois Villon. I haven't murdered anybody, but like
I know.
I sort of want I want the poets to be poets. And like part of me is like with Stephen Scaer feels like like shut up and play basketball, like get do the thing that you can do. And I think on the other hand, like it is clear that in Becker and Beckerian terms, like this is his immortality project now. Like he's entirely staked himself on this, and he believes in it. Like he very sincerely believes in this crusade that he's gone on, and I think he would probably say something similar to what Palestinian activists would say, or with like, "Hey, this isn't a time for poetry," or like "Hey, I love poetry, but that's we'll save that for after the struggle." Right? I mean, I think that's probably something like what he would say, is my guess.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
people who say that don't actually love poetry, but that's a different.
Maybe I mean, yeah, he has not said that, but I'm putting words in his mouth. But just the evidence suggests that he has
Yeah, yeah.
set poetry aside as being less urgent than this
Well, yeah,
other thing.
let me also expand on what you were saying, or like join it with a slightly separate point. But what I also find quite sad and interesting in this is that I don't think I like his poetry as much as you do, but there are certainly poems in here that I do like. And
Yeah,
in many of these poems, no matter how well it's ultimately produced or how well it's put forward, there is like an impulse towards studying things from a sort of morally ambivalent or morally complex,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
right? Like an attempt to entertain contraries, and that's so interesting because that is very much the opposite of the activist stance, pro or anti-trans, whatever, pro
yeah, yeah,
anti,
yeah,
whatever. Like these stances are committing themselves are committed to a very I mean, I would say simplistic myself, but even if we were taking out like evaluation, they are committing themselves to a simplified view of things, an attempt to get at one thing while sort of discrediting the existence, the arguments, the sort of behaviors of the other group, right? And that is fascinating because it is the complete opposite of the complexity, the sort of studied ambivalence, the interest in multiplicity of desire and opinion that these poems, partake in.
yeah,
So it's not just that he's committed himself to a different immortality project. He's committed himself to a project with entirely different, if not sort of oppositional, a sort of oppositional mainframe, right? Like an entirely different way of seeing things, an entirely different attitude towards complexity and differing opinions. I guess he would say that that's because it's urgent and children are being mutilated, or that's his words, not mine, or that's my paraphrase of his words.
Yeah.
But the children are being mutilated and stuff, and therefore, like, there is nothing complex about it. But
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's a naive. I would respond that that's a very naive thing to say. I mean, even in cases where people are suffering great deals, I still don't think. Even then, I think it's suspect to say it's simplistic, really. But it's interesting because my biggest criticism of his turning towards this kind of activism is that it does kind of betray the kind of mental allegiances the poet and the artist requires. And I have maybe an entirely more controversial take on transness and writers, which I might or might not get into at some point. But I do think him entering into this kind of activism is the opposite of, I think, the artist's urge, because the artist has to engage in contraries, while this activism is itself an attempting to put forward a singular case for something in the strongest terms of language and to annihilate, an oppositional case. And so maybe in entering into this mind state, this sort of life project, he stopped writing poetry because he literally can't. Maybe this has kind of snuffed, at least temporarily, snuffed out his sort of artistic practice, because it is so oppositional to the sort of artistic poetic mode, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't really allow for being an uncertainty,
Yeah, exactly. It's
right?
activism is anti-negative capability.
Yeah. Well, so we talked about this a good deal. I thought maybe I would just read one of these poems so people hear a little bit of what's going on. And I should say there are a couple of modes that his poems take, and in the poems that came out after this book, with one exception maybe, I think they tended more toward a certain. I think his weakest form, and the one that he seemed to get the most praise for, was a sort of socially conservative leaning, very like crisply rhymed, and I mean he writes formal poetry, rhyme and mostly,
Yeah.
or meter and mostly rhyme. There's a sort of a satirical, like a slightly more pusillanimous Thomas Hardy mode of
Oh,
like smirkingly chiding the excesses of modernity, sort of poem.
are these the
That,
ones that sort
yeah.
of tetragrammatic couplets?
Sorry.
Are these the ones in sort of tetragrammatic couplets?
I mean, I think that's a
Oh,
lot of the. I think those are
yeah.
the poems. So those are not. I of the poems, I didn't really include any of those. There was. I included one poem that I thought was sort of in the tart satirical mode, just because I thought it was actually pretty good. Like I like this poem. I'll read this first because it is like this is the mode he probably got praised for most, and of that mode, this is the probably the only one I really liked. This is called "Say Nothing But Good," after the Latin "nil nisi bonum." I don't remember. "Say nothing but good of the dead" is the complete motto. Say nothing but good. We pulled your funeral off without a hitch. Morticians had to spread a pound of wax across your face to smooth away the cracks that spilled your brains into a roadside ditch. Your youngest child, the one you nicknamed Bitch, described your death, revising awkward facts. She said you called before God swung the axe, as if to say goodbye. Well, that was rich. She didn't mention how you begged for money to head downtown to finish getting plastered and rent a prostitute. It's almost funny how much we love you dead. And quite a show we've put on in your memory, you bastard. I wish that we had done this years ago. So, I mean, I think I love a good malediction, and in this case, I think part of what sells me on it is that it doesn't feel, as it does in some of his poems, as if we're getting a true finger wagging from the author. It feels like a convincing evocation of a feeling. I mean, it feels like a
Yes.
lyric utterance of wrath and resentment toward this dead guy. And in that sense, I buy it, and I think it's pretty well turned and put together. That is, however, I think sort of the less interesting of his. Like, I don't think that's the most interesting mode that he has when he gets sort of overtly when he's writing very consciously I think. I think he's a poet who tends to write either consciously or there are poems, as you suggested, where something else starts to slip in. Some of it is a
Yeah.
being in moral uncertainty. Some of it is a love of language. Some of it is a sort of channeling other poets because they're poems that he clearly is responding to or carrying on or re-rendering other poets. He has a couple of translations from Verlaine, or a few. I included two of them that I thought were
Yeah.
pretty good. Here's another poem that's maybe in a very different mode, and I think this is one I thought like shit. This guy's doing something here. This is Backyard Triumph, and he's using that word also in the sense of like the Roman parade celebrating a victory. Backyard Triumph. Truant from April chores, I daydream in a chair beneath a tree that scatters its petals when it stirs, the way a girl might scatter blossoms before a litter that brings a self-made god exultant down her road, while Calvinistic bees insist that glory's brief. Extend the allegory. Should petals fall before me? I've not been made aware of having won a war, and I did not design a bridge or new vaccine. The leaves against my fence betray my indolence. This fragrant celebration might be for anyone. I know it's undeserved, but that has not deterred me from taking pleasure in the soft spring weather. The triumphs that I seek are held for their own sake, and shower us with grace, like petals on the grass.
It's very Auden-esque, that one.
Yeah, I just think it's quite beautiful, and I don't know, it rings true without my getting a sense that I'm merely having an opinion shared with me,
Yes.
which is I think the weakness that his poems fall into it. This was, I should say, was so it's introduced by A.M. Juster. I don't know if A.M. Juster was the judge for the prize that year that he was a finalist for, but you can see this as being in along the line of A.M. Juster, who is I think also like a very skillful and gifted poet who has his. I mean, every poet has his own weaknesses and tendencies, and Juster's I think similarly. He has a tendency toward moralizing and toward a comfortable representation of a conservative perspective that I think in his best poems he transcends by a little more being an uncertainty and a little more love of the language itself. It's funny, like I'm not generally a somebody who's a big advocate for or celebrant of poetry that merely revels in language, but in a way, like with these guys' poems, I think like I like it better when they do lean in that direction.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Tell me. So I sent you 14 of these, or
Yeah, I
14
was gonna
pages
read
of
the
these,
one.
and then you read the book. But yeah, tell me what your sort of your impressions. Yeah,
I was gonna read the one I like the most.
yeah. Please.
I can. I was gonna say
Was it
also,
from my selection or was it from the rest of the
yes,
book?
it was from your selection. It
Okay.
was Mentor. Mentor was the one I
Mentor.
liked.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I thought you would like that. Yeah, that one's got a little thorn in it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I would just like to say that Juster also coincidentally has a poem about a dead person, a dead friend he's angry about. Although in that case, that's a poem about suicide instead of just a person being a person. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I got in trouble about that one.
did it a long time ago, didn't you?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because I reviewed that book. I will say I gave that book a very good review, and I said that I had harsh things to say about that one poem, and that was
Yeah.
apparently the only thing people heard. But whatever. Yeah, I stand by what I said about that one poem. But like, fine. But I think he's a very skillful poet. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, this is Mentor, which I think is it's quite early in the book. So Mentor. Now 30 some years on, my palms still hurt when I recall how Miss Sadowski stalked among the rows of desks, and if I talked, she called my name in measured, soft, but curt, and crossed the room. She wore a miniskirt and candy apple boots, and when she walked, She swayed like swing set chains. With her eyes locked on mine, she meted out my just dessert. Lost in her scent, the sting left by her ruler, I acted up again. Let's try your right. Whack, whack, whack. Her blows much crueler. My mother asked me why my grades turned bad, as if I knew what kept me up at night, as tortured lyrics filled my spiral pad. Yeah, I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
because as I feel like that even more than the first poem you read out, although I think that also has a certain element, but this one really exemplifies the sort of spiral of a evoking maybe not a complexity of different moral perspectives, but evoking a sort of ambivalent situation where various sort of elements are involved, right? Like
Yeah, yeah.
sexual adolescence and sort of the slightly cringing sort of impotence of that adolescent of that sexuality, and simultaneously the teacher, there's a kind of nexus for something ill-defined but very powerfully evoked. And like even in the poem you read about the resentment poem,
Yeah, yeah.
oh,
Nothing. Say nothing but good.
they know him are good.
Yeah,
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 yeah. Good. Like the pleasure in that poem is also that it's the resentment is very strong and it doesn't
yeah,
counter its argument, but you can also tell in the kind of weft of its emotional structuring that there's a certain sense of guilt or like a sense of a sort of guilty resentment coming through, and it's that kind of ambivalent handling of these kind of emotional nexuses, which is so which is I think the strength of these lyrics. They are, as you say, very I think they're very typical new formalistic.
yeah, yeah.
Just
The style and mode is one that I knew would be not your favorite. Yeah,
well, I've just seen it so many times
yeah, yeah, yeah.
before. Justa talks about them being very influenced by Robert Frost, which is fair enough. They're very Horatian, very Horatian. I think I
But
do think
most when there's a little when that ambiguity is there. Most when they
yeah.
take a little bit more of a turn, like this one does. Yeah.
I'm not saying Horatian. I mean, I'd say they're Horatian sometimes, whether they're good or bad. That be
Hmm.
not that they're like of the quality of Horace, but they're trying sometimes to sort of give you a situation and then taking a certain emotional or moral instruction out of that situation. And yeah,
Yeah,
as you
yeah, yeah,
say,
yeah.
that comes through best when it's kind of more of a spiral pad.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, and Frost too. Like, will
yeah.
bundle ambiguity and contradictions in a way that I think too often Scaer settles on an irony or settles on a sarcasm or settles on a punchline. And he doesn't allow that.
Yeah,
He doesn't allow the poem to remain in that ambiguous, uncertain, uncomfortable space that Frost is so good with.
well, exactly because I think Frost is a very dark, ironistic poet.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh, and even, I mean, it's become, enough people have said it now that it's almost become a cliche to say that everyone misunderstands Frost and he's much darker. But even when sort of A.M. Juster talks about, compares Scare to Frost, like, I think, like, some people, I think, still lose sight a little bit of the intensity of Frost's sort of darkness or
yeah,
cruelty. Because Frost is not. People like to call Frost. Frost was influenced by Horace, but Frost, I think, is even much darker than Horace, and Horace isn't a particularly happy guy. But Frost is, I think, has an even crueler vision of the world. I would say he has. Yeah, he's a talented poet. I think only as much. I'm talking about Scare, but a
Mhm.
talented poet, certainly a minor poet. In that, I don't think he has a certain I think he has an attentiveness to emotion in language. I don't really I think his language never I think moves into something sort of fascinating or strange. It never reaches like maybe the skein of reality, it only reaches the sort of the skein of emotion. But he certainly has talent. He certainly has talent. I give him that. You said that his stuff influenced you maybe.
Yeah,
So,
I realize like rereading this book, there are lines or turns that I that like sat in my memory because I think reading this book, it's a book that like in a very direct way talks a lot about being a father and like really raising children. His day job was working in special ed, So in addition to raising his own kids, he spent a lot of time caring for kids, dealing with kids in an intimate way, and I think he addressed that quite in ways that that rang true, and that that spoke to me reading it, and that there are certain little lines or turns that I don't think there's anything. The closest is he uses the construction neglected lovers, and when I read it I thought initially that I'd stolen the line, but it's neglected taxes in one of my poems, but it's in the same place in the poem. I mean, there's just these
Yeah.
little patterned moments of lines or turns that on rereading them I realize, like, oh, that has been sitting in my internal verbal landscape, and that's where that leapt out from when I was writing that poem.
And you
um
both have poems about having daughters.
Yeah, yeah,
Obviously.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, it in different, certainly in different ways, but there are even like his poem about going to, visiting colleges with his daughter. I realized, like, he uses the image of Vesuvius at the end in a way that I realized I use it in a way that is, I think probably there was an echo of his poem in my mind when I wrote the poem that mentions Vesuvius in Soft Black Stars. So I mean, yeah, they're little moments where he kind of it flickered through my recollection. This poem, I thought the poem overall I found quite annoying. This poem called "The Sacrifice of Cain," but I really loved the last stanza of it. So I just clipped out the last stanza for you, and I know that parts of this were echoing in my mind when I wrote certain poems later. This is from "The Sacrifice of Cain." I wish I were a better man. My face is marked for mediocrity. The year meanders past, not pausing to replace neglected lovers, mend a blown career. But there are compensations for disgrace. This lilac-shaded hammock, horseshoes, beer, and I'm in no position to decline whenever God provides an anodyne.
Yeah, that is good, especially marked by mediocrity. Is
Yeah, yeah,
a
yeah.
lovely savage alliteration, marked for mediocrity.
I think maybe the most perfect poem of his that I've read, and the one that is probably the most Frostian, although it responds to a Frost poem that actually our good friend Daniel Cowper cited, "Nothing Gold Can Stay," which, here, let me read that real quick. Very, very short Frost poem. "Nothing gold can stay. Nature's first green is gold, her hardest hue to hold. Her early leaf's a flower, but only so an hour. Then leaf subsides to leaf. So Eden sank to grief. So dawn goes down to day. Nothing gold can stay." And
What
then he,
that,
yeah,
that
sorry.
is so didactic. That is so the didacticism of that has been so intense that I've realized I need to give up my vast reserves of gold and like moment.
You've learned your lesson about gold. Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
I've been taught. I'll tell
yeah.
you that.
This comes very near the end of the book. This is Scaer's response to that poem. I mean, he doesn't name it, but it's pretty self-evident. It's called "Gold is the Last to Leave." The sugar maples hold the budding April gold of florid carotene, masked within the green of summer's chlorophyll, until the frosts distill the yellow in the leaf. So age refines the grief that never found reprieve. Gold is the last to leave.
Wow, that is a nice reversal.
Yeah, that I really like that. Yeah, I mean, so again, like, I don't reading this book, I just thought, like, I read a lot of books. I was reading a lot of contemporary, read 99 fucking books of poetry, and there were some good ones in there. Not many, but like,
Yeah.
if this book had been in that box, if I had included it in that review, it definitely would have been one of the standouts. And because I think the way I did it ultimately is I just picked 9 individual poems out of the 99 books that I kind of highlighted. And this poem might have been in that list of 9. I mean, it really was better than, it's not that as a book overall it's great. Obviously, bad title, bad cover, a lot of annoying poems in it, a lot of finger waggy poems, a lot of like eye roll inducing poems, a lot of very like as Jonathan would say, replacement level erratosphere poems, but some that really stand out. I think some that are quite beautiful, and it promised something, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
It
Yeah, there was
promised
certain,
something, and then that seems, again, with the exception of this one poem that was in National Review, one of the last ones he published called Make Believe, which I think is not, it's not as beautiful as sort of the poems of his that are most alive to language, but it is closer. It has some of that, uncertainty and poignancy derived from not having a perfectly comfortable moral confidence in what you're saying. Here, I'll read it real quick because this came out after Pumpkin Chucking. I thought it was.
sorry, I went silent because I thought you were about to read it. But
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
yes.
yeah. I'll read. All right, this is Make Believe. This came out in 2016. When she was playing in the yard, she talked to someone she imagined by her side. A soldier or a prince, perhaps, who walked along with her when she was playing bride. I stood there too, but never saw or heard whoever came between us on the lawn. One August day he left without a word. September came. The princess too was gone. But she returned this morning dressed in white. And I am finally learning to pretend. For standing right beside her in plain sight for just a moment, I could see her friend. A prince in full dress uniform was there. Before my thoughts escaped into the air.
I
You know,
like
it's
that.
yeah, it's set up in a way where you could see a more obvious and ready to hand version of it that was like she used to imagine playing with a prince and now here is her prince and she's married. How lovely. But it sort of it sidesteps that, and it
Yeah.
yeah, it feels a little more
Well, and
uncomfortable. Yeah, it does, like he doesn't quite allow himself to take comfort in this. It still is this fantasy, and it still is not quite. He takes ownership of his own interpretation rather than trying to lay it too firmly on her shoulders.
right, and again, it's kind of the opposite of what one does as an activist, because it's an attempt to strangely gaze into someone else's mental situation while also engaging in the complexities of being outside of that, and that situation being fictional, fantastical. It's in its way a little sort of ars poetica for the art that he then completely abandoned for something entirely oppositional to it. You know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah.
weirdly at such a 180-degree angle from the activism. That's
Yeah.
interesting.
And this was like this was like a year or two before I think that real hard turn came.
I truly do not believe that artists can write or be activistic. I mean, like I can believe that one can make art and be an activist, and you can sort of switch between them. You can compartmentalize different ways of seeing in reality, but
Yeah.
I find it entirely suspect. And people will say they can write activist poetry. I don't understand what activist poetry is. I think most of what I hear activist poetry is trash, and I think again it doesn't go with poetry. There's lament, there's like
Yeah.
lament, one of the oldest kinds of poetry ever, but that's not activism. That is like a terrible wailing for cruelty and for crime and for the past, and mourning. Mourning isn't activism. Mourning is mourning. But like that. So I believe you can, lament as a poetic form is perfectly existent. But I just find all these people who claim to be sort of activist poets just laughably incommensurate with what poetry really is and what one has to sort of think to be a poet. It's so against negative capability, and I
Yeah.
really believe in negative capability.
It's funny. While I was transcribing the poems that I sent you, I had a live stream from ContraPoints playing on my computer, and it was sort of funny to me, of course, because ContraPoints, of course, is trans and is very sort of publicly talked through a lot of her experience as a trans woman. But what also sort of stood out to me as I was writing these poems and sort of half listening to her was that at their best, both she and Scaer artists who live in negative capability. Like she, in a sense, she often gets in trouble for not being enough of an activist, for being too much interested in ideas for their own sake and too much willing to grapple with art that, you know, should be off limits because of its moral stance. You know, that she is at her best not she's at her best not really an activist. She's a person who has a, you know, a personal experience that has political implications, but is not really interested in filtering everything through any kind of moral certainty.
Yeah.
And I think that's true of him when he
Yeah.
was writing the stuff of his that has real merit. And it, you know, again, like I think he and plenty of people, probably some people listening to this would say like, oh well, he's you know, fighting the good fight and doing something that really matters now and making a difference in protecting children. And, you know, again, like I politically disagree with him, but I also just like as an artist, my thought is like, you fucked up, man. You fucked like you could have been doing something that had some artistic merit, and you're doing something that it doesn't even seem like you're being especially politically effective. Like it doesn't seem like even by your own the standards of your own goals, it doesn't seem like you're really doing much other than like exciting some Christian conservative podcasters, you know?
Yeah, well, I will say that like what this Sidewalk Steve is a great moniker, but like what he's doing,
Sidewalk Steve is it's both because it's both his name for himself and it's like the trans activists who hate him, their name for him,
yeah,
and it seems so suitable in both cases.
I had never discovered this website before you sent me a link to it, and I was like, wow, it's like a sort of turf, you know, trans exclusionary radical feminist or whatever. It's like the turf cinematic universe, you know,
Oh,
because
the
they got
transgender map that like
yeah,
charts.
yeah, it's like another supervillain, but it's not a
Yeah.
supervillain. It's just a guy on a street.
Right, yeah, because it sort of has him cited along with like his supervillain pantheon, like the rogues gallery of like other bad
Yeah,
guys he hangs out with.
yeah.
And they all have like you know, street names. Like they all have sort of special monikers that are not just their given names.
But I will say, like this kind of activism, especially. I mean, I dislike activism in general, but this particular kind of activism, I do find quite perfect. There's something quite, I don't know. It does like disgust me. Not even for what he's saying, but for his tactics. The tactics themselves just seem to me unfair and uncomfortable. And
Yeah,
I vaguely see what he's doing by getting attention. But if he really cares about, and maybe he does, but if I just don't understand why, if you really cared about children in this way, why you would not try to be doing it in some other method than just harassing people at a sort of march, at a peaceful march on a street. I don't, or trying to
yeah,
get them to goad. I mean, maybe I don't know. At in the best light, I guess his activism can be described as sort of attempting to winnow out the fools and the sort of more hideous elements within the group, within sort of the transgender community. Winnowing out the sort of reactive chaff. But
yeah.
I I don't know. I find it all quite inhuman, really, compared to,
Yeah.
you know, the many other ways he could practice activism, which I would still criticize for my own stated aesthetic disagreements of activism. But you know, there are many other ways he could go about this, and I don't understand why he's going about this in such an aggressive method.
Yeah, I mean,
And
it seem honestly at this point, it seems to me like the perfect converse of progressive virtue signaling. That he's not really
yeah,
doing this in order to achieve a political end, or achieve, he's certainly like he's guaranteeing that it will be impossible to achieve any kind of compromise.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
there will be no polite discussion of like medical policy
no,
following this kind of confrontation. He's guaranteeing that all that's going to happen is he's going to get a lot of attention online from the people he likes and the people who hate him, and that will, and in both cases that will serve his reputation, but it's not going to. It doesn't seem to be actually helping anybody. It's the same feeling I have about so much, you know, lefty activism. Like, wait, whose life is this improving?
yeah. I think I've become in my own way incredibly not controversial, but like I think as I grow older, I've become sort of
You become an adult.
yeah. Now have I got controversial. No, but as I grow older, I think I've become radicalized in a very specific way, which is that I have less and less time for many of the sort of politico-moral arguments surrounding art. I don't have much time for separating the art from the artist anymore because not because I don't believe it, because I do believe in it very strongly, and because I'm just so bored of like rehashing it.
Yeah, yeah,
And I'm bored of the sort of left-wing arguments about how art, how poets are activists and stuff. It just all bores me. And like I feel like I've become very radicalized, not in a sort of art for art sense way, but just in a way that I do believe in the separate power of art from sort of its political context. And
yeah,
I honestly believe that, to when you're faced with people who are like true artists, whatever their kind is, that true artistry is an obsession. Maybe is close, I think, to kinds of mental illness, but at a very obsessive thing. And I think like the endless attempts to try and put it to rights, or trying to turn it into a kind of utilitarian function within politics or whatever, are just ultimately and endlessly doomed. And so I'm just kind of bored of having people tell them this. This is, I mean, I love doing episodes like this with you. I'm not saying I'm bored of this, but
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
I'm bored of I'm just bored of people arguing the other way, because I don't think it's never going to change. Artists are always going to be There's always going to be a lot of terrible people who are artists, and making art is always going to be a bizarre obsession that kind of obliterates a lot of one's life and a lot of things in it to an extent. And I don't think that's ever really going to change. And I think it's kind of a doomed mission to attempt to continue this kind of political project for art, in a sense. Not that you can't have political poems. There are very, very great political poems by Mandelstam and Yeats, and
Yeah.
even in the present moment. But that again is born from an obsession with language, not from an obsession with standing on a sidewalk. You know, so I feel as I grow older, like like at now the very wise age of 22, like near death. No, I'm joking, but as I grow older, somewhat, I just get more and more bored. Like, I remember when the news came out. It's gonna be very controversial. I remember when the news came out that, oh God, what's her name? She was a Canadian short story writer who won the Nobel Prize.
Alice
And
Munro.
yeah, when the news came out, Alice Munro had assisted her abusive husband. Had lied.
She yeah helped sort
Yeah,
of basically cover up and
yeah, his child abuse.
is yeah
And I just remember thinking, oh no, here we go. Like, we're gonna get so many more articles about how people now can't read Monroe,
yeah
and
yeah
like fair. And I understand, it's a horrible thing. Like, I can understand the physical abhorrence one can enter into from reading about that. And yet, I just don't. That's not how art functions. I don't. I'm just so tired of these kind of arguments that one now can't do this. I just because yeah, guess what? Like, most people from before the 19th century who you're reading were horrible anyway. You just don't have like exact records of it. So it's
yeah
just,
yeah yeah.
yeah,
No,
bored.
well, and this is a kind of a curious sort of integrity. Like, though I think Stephen Scaer's cause is a bad one and his methods are self-defeating, or they're I think maybe they're not self-defeating. They're serving the true purpose they seem to be serving is getting attention online, but he has, in a way, although there are poems of his that have a kind of a a tisking, conservative bent to them, and harp on some familiar culture war talking points. For the most part, he has basically said, all right, well, I'm now going to do activism, so I will not do poetry, or at least not publicly. So like
Yeah.
he what he's not doing is he's not being an anti-trans poet.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It is sort of, he's just set that aside. So, you
No, that
know,
is. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I
Really.
guess in that sense, I respect the choice, not like at least the choice not to try to make, not to try to
Yeah.
wage your political campaign, in verse.
Yeah. I don't respect the choice, but I do respect the missing out of poetry. I respect
Yeah, yeah.
the omission of the poetry. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 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 yeah. I don't, yeah, not. I don't think it's a good choice, I'm glad that at least
Yeah.
he's not doing it in poetry,
Yeah.
because I think there. I mean, there are, and maybe this is, maybe this will be a good place to pivot, because I do want to talk some about the Kanakia piece, but
Yeah.
I am sort of interested in I mean, we've talked a lot about didactic art recently, but my suspicion is that we're in the parallel universe where, around 2018, Stephen Scaer became a really strident pro-trans activist. My suspicion is that the poetry would still very much be a part of it.
Yeah.
And maybe that's just because culturally, the arts tend to be lean more progressive, and so you would have more of a community supporting that sort of thing. And probably his poetry would only get more successful under that banner, but it would not be good for the poems, whether or not, setting the politics of it aside. That was my conversation with Cameron about Stephen Scaer. We went on to talk about a story by Naomi Kanakia. We returned briefly to the Scaer story, but mostly we talked about a story by Naomi Kanakia and some related questions about didacticism as a form and how gender comes up in writing, and both in the act of writing and in the product of writing. It was a weird one, but it was pretty enjoyable. We also talked a little bit about our friend Ethan McGuire and some of the work we have seen and would love to see from him in the didactic form, not content, form. Though, hey, whatever works. You can hear that at SLEERICKETS.substack.com. You can subscribe to The Secret Show there, put your email address in the slot, and I will give you a week's access for free. After that, it's really fucking cheap. You can also, once you subscribe, you can listen on the website. You can also just, you will get an email that will provide a link so you can just listen to it on your podcatcher app. I think some people may not realize that. But you don't have to listen on Substack. You can just use SLEERICKETS.substack.com to get a link so you can just listen straight from, Apple Podcast or Overcast or whatever you use. All right. Yeah, that's it, I think. If you have a little extra income and you would like to do some more to support the show, you can sign up to be a Motherfucker of the Arts, a founding member, or you can go to the website, SLEERICKETS.com, go to the upper right-hand corner, or if you're on a phone, to the plus sign, click there, and you will find Chip In, a button that will take you to a website where you can just donate directly to the show. It is all welcome, and it helps keep the podcast going. And for all of you who did want to send angry emails to Cameron, his email address is cameronwtc@hotmail.com. Thank you all for listening, and with any luck, I will be speaking to you again very soon. Until then.